Shalom. Today we're going to have a lecture on, it's supposed to be on Parshat Emor, which is this week's Shabbos Parsha, but we're also going to discuss Parshat Achrei and Kedoshim, three very important parshas in the middle of the book of Vayikra. Vayikra is a book about holiness. The entire book, the third book of the Torah, describes holiness. Why do you need to know about holiness? Because if you're going to have the temple of God, you need kedusha, you need holiness around the temple, and therefore you have to know what it means to be holy. After all, God said, mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. I want you, the children of Israel, to be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So it makes sense that in the book of Vayikra, we learn what holiness means. And the answer is holiness means a lot of different things. On the one hand, the holiness means Tum'ah and Tahara, purity and impurity. Being pure, staying away from things that are impure, is a way to make yourself holier. Certainly because the place, it's called Kedushat Makom, the place is holy, the place is Kadosh, and we're talking about the place of the Beit HaMikdash. That's where the presence of God is felt, and therefore you have to learn about how to act in a place of the presence of God. We mentioned that this notion of how to act in the presence of God is very, very important and almost very, very dangerous, because if you act inappropriately, even if you're the sons of Aaron, the high priest, you will be killed. Okay, so that is how God's holiness is even more profound. When even trying to do something good, you're going to be burned by the presence of God, by the fire of God. So that is what takes place in Parshat Vayikra and Parshat Tzav and Parshat Shmini. Then comes Parshat Tazria Metzora. Tazria Metzora is talking about the holiness also of the temple, about an individual who's impure, that they have to stay away from the temple because obviously they clash. Tum'ah, impurity, it clashes with kedusha. You can't be kadosh and tameh at the same time. That's the last two parshas. Then comes Parshat Achrei. Parshat Achrei is about the Yom Kippur service. The Yom Kippur service is the holiest day of the year. And Aaron has to learn, he's the high priest, he's going to be administering, he's going to be serving the people and God on that day. And therefore the people have to learn what it is to be holy on that day, and how to do the proper sacrifice to attain atonement. Atonement is forgiveness from God. This we learn in the second verse. Tell your brother Aaron, this is how he should come in, or the third verse, only he should come to the Kodesh, to the center, to the holiness, with a series of sacrifices, and in certain garments, and after going to the mikvah for purification, and after doing it several times. In ancient times, the way you purified yourself, or atoned, or reached higher levels of faith, was through animal sacrifice. Okay? We can't say that today because we don't have animal sacrifice. The way we would do that today is through personal morality, is through introspection, is through higher meditation, is through doing good deeds, is through studying Torah. All of these would hopefully elevate a person's spiritual status. You'll ask me what happens when the temple gets rebuilt. I don't have an answer. I can't imagine that we're going to go back and start animal sacrifice. It's just not something that is thought to be something holy. But I'm in the minority. Most rabbis and traditional Jews think that absolutely we're going to go exactly what it says in the Torah. I think the Torah is supposed to be something that is a Tarat Chaim. It's a living, breathing entity, an expression, a manifestation of God, and therefore thousands of years after the animal sacrifice, of course, there are new avenues towards holiness that are rooted in the Torah, but obviously are to our day and age. It has to be that way. I could be wrong though. In the ancient times, there was this notion of the Sa'ir La Hashem and the Sa'ir La Azazel. A goat, we're familiar with the sacrificial goat, the goat to God and the goat that went to Azazel. It's the same goat, or two goats that were exactly the same, and there was a lottery, and one was offered to God, and one was sent to the valley of Azazel, and it was Kedusha opportunity was forsaken. You understand? In other words, you have an opportunity to take this animal and do something to reach a level of purity, a level of atonement, a level of holiness. And with one animal, that's exactly what you do. And with the other animal, you don't. And you're basically saying, this is when you squander your opportunity to get closer to God. And I think that's the message of the symbolism of these two animals. They look exactly the same, and almost a matter of chance divides them, where one goes to the to the valley of death, and one goes to the heights of spirituality. The rabbis say that it's this animal, this sa'ir, which is the essential component which offers atonement on Yom Kippur. So Maimonides said, well, if it offers atonement on Yom Kippur, and since the temple is destroyed, there is no atonement, there is no sacrificial goat, there is no sa'ir, there is no service, so what do we do about Yom Kippur? And Maimonides answers, don't worry, the day itself offers atonement. So you see that the Torah, or Judaism, is able to pivot when it's missing an essential component of the Beit HaMikdash. Nevertheless, Yom Kippur maintains its status. The same should apply with many other things. There's an offering of spices. It's called the Ketoret, which is another important atoning feature of the temple. And when this is going on, no one's allowed to be in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, when the priest is there. In fact, it was a very dangerous in the daily Talmud studying. We're actually learning the book of Yoma about Yom Kippur, and it discusses that the high priest, it was a very, very dangerous thing to do. I mean, if he got something wrong, he might find himself in his last breaths. And in fact, when he was not of the high moral fiber, he died in the temple on Yom Kippur, and they had to kind of pull him out and send someone in his place. So you see that this is a very dramatic and intense moment, and that's why on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen comes out at the end of the day, he's smiling ear to ear, like rejoicing like no other in his life. We'd like to talk about teshuvah, which means repentance. And Maimonides says the mitzvah of teshuvah is not, feeling bad. It's not, changing maybe an idea about how you lived your life, but rather doing something called vidui. Vidui we find in verse 21. It's actually done on the animal, where the priest puts his hands on the goat, and he confesses the sins of the people of Israel. And as if to say, we're transferring the sins of the people onto this animal, and then we're going to sacrifice this animal, and that will get them expiation, atonement for their sins. And Yom Kippur is really a day, and it's you have to marvel at the fact that Yom Kippur is a day we spend in the synagogue. But in ancient times, there was no synagogue, so it was a day that the priests spent in the temple, and we vicariously, through the actions of the priests, we became purified, we became atoned, we became, blessed for a new year. As it says in verse 30, or verse 29 and 30, and this shall be a law for all time. The 7th month, the 10th day of the month. You better practice self-denial because you don't want to indulge in your physical desires while this is going on for your spirit. No one shall do work, not the citizen, nor the ger. Ger in the Torah means a stranger who comes and lives amongst you. There are 2 types of gerim. One is called a ger tzedek, and one is called the ger toshav. Ger toshav doesn't necessarily become Jewish, they just live amongst you, whereas a ger tzedek, they actually become part of the Jewish people. Ki bayom hazeh, for on this day, yechaper alechem, God will atone for your sins, litaher etchem. You can't become tahor until you have atonement. So we think tahor, purity, just means that there are no dead animals or dead bodies. No, you have to purify your soul. And the way to do that is through Torah and mitzvot and working on yourself and also receiving it from God on this day. The Torah continues. Tells us the law about blood. That you have to be very, very cautious about eating blood. In ancient times, blood was considered the life force. I guess it still is today, but it was part of the culture of that if you conquered someone, you drank the blood. If you ate an animal, you drank its blood. You as if took over, you showed your dominance. And the Torah rejects that and tries to say that there's a prohibition till today of eating the blood of an animal. For the life of all flesh, its blood is its life. So I say to the Israelite people, do not partake in any blood of any flesh, for the life of the flesh is its blood. And if you partake in it, you will be cut off. And this is a word that's used carefully in the Torah. It refers to karet. Karet means being cut off, and usually means being cut off not only about physically being cut off, but spiritually being cut off from the people of Israel. We move on. Chapter 18. Chapter 18 is the laws of sexual laws, laws of sexual promiscuity, laws of uncovering the nakedness of people who are close to you, and certainly, I guess you could assume people who are further away from you. The way the Torah presents it is by saying, do not act like they acted in Egypt where you left from, but also don't act like they acted in Canaan, where you're going to, because these are ways that are against God. Rather, you should do my laws, you should follow my commandments. I'm the Lord your God. This is a concept that applies throughout all of history till this very day. If society says that this is considered moral, and the Torah says that it is immoral, so it is immoral, regardless of the fact that it's not politically correct to call it that. The Torah is a living Torah. And therefore, even if society, there are certain types of things that happen that maybe at 1,000 years ago, it was the most blessed thing, and then 1,000 years later is the most cursed thing. Societies evolve and change based on their whims and what they deem is right and what they deem is appropriate. And the Torah is eternal. So you need to follow the eternal nature of the Torah, and that's how you will live. And if you keep following society, then you will not really be able to function on your own. You will just be a shadow of what you should be in this world. Now comes a list of around 15 different types of people who are close to you, for whom you should not uncover their nakedness. I guess that's a euphemism of saying engage in sexual relations inappropriately. But maybe it just means, don't see them naked. There are different ways to view it. The first one is your father's nakedness, and the second one is your mother's nakedness. And it doesn't say exactly why. It just says their nakedness, and you should not uncover it. So there's a prohibition against uncovering the nakedness of a father and a mother, and your father's wife, and your father's sister, and your mother's daughter, and your granddaughter, one side or the other side. Basically, obviously, you can understand that we're talking about all of your close relatives. The rabbis are trying to understand, why is this, it should start by saying your neighbor's wife. Now, of course, that's one of the 10 commandments, but nevertheless, why are they talking about something that's so intimate? Incest. These are incest laws. And you'd say, well, that's very natural for you to not be engaging in that. And the answer is no, not the case. Remember, in ancient times, people lived in clans. And who were you most likely to see? Your people who are closest to you. And you might develop an attraction. I mean, Freud taught this to us. And therefore, it seems to be part of human nature. So, so the Torah says this is what you have to be careful about most of all before you engage in talking about illicit relationships outside of your own camp. And therefore, this is one approach. Another approach might be that if you protect yourself in your own family, then of course, how much more so will you protect yourself, your desires for other people's families as well. But then the Torah does include everyone else. It goes to your daughter-in-law and your son-in-law. All right, so that already, right, your brother's wife, that's already not a blood connection. You might say, oh, come on, my mother, my sister, my brother. I mean, it's unnatural to think of these things. Yeah, but it's not necessarily unnatural to think of your brother-in-law, right? I mean, that's your sister's husband. If you're attracted to him, I'm sure there are cases that that this takes place, and therefore the Torah goes out of its way and starts with a bloodline, and then it moves to a larger radius of those people with whom you have contact, that you need to be very, very careful to not engage uncovering their nakedness, which is really a nice way of saying it, because it starts with uncovering nakedness, right? I mean, the whole, no one just simply engages in sexual relations on the street. What they do is they meet and they talk, and then they get closer, and then they uncover some certain things that they and that increases their excitement, and that of course leads them towards an inappropriate affair. The Torah continues and says, don't take two sisters. You're allowed to marry, more than one woman according to the Torah, although that was changed 1,000 years ago to the Ashkenazi community by a certain Rabbi Gershon. The Sephardic community more or less also doesn't do it anymore, but the idea of a man having several wives is not prohibited by the Torah. However, no thanks. However, the women should not be related to each other, otherwise they're going to come to hate each other, and there's a whole book in the Talmud about that called Yevamot. Verse 19. Verse 19 tells us that a woman who is even your wife, who normally it would be permitted for you to engage in sexual relations, not only permitted, but encouraged. Remember, there's a mitzvah in the Torah to propagate, to have children. The answer the Torah says is yes, that's true, but not whilst she is a nidah. What is a nidah? It's a woman who is in her menstrual state roughly 12 days out of the year. 12 days out of the month. During those 12 days, not only, it's several days during which she is menstruating per se, but then it's 7 clean days in which she has to make sure that she no longer sees blood. After that, those 12 or 13 days pass, the woman goes to the mikvah, and then they're allowed to resume their relationship, a marital relationship. Now, listen to this idea. A man is not allowed to engage in uncovering the nakedness of a nidah. Who is a nidah? The answer is any woman who has experienced a menstruation and has not gone to the mikvah. That's a nidah. And therefore, here is the way that this law talks about the prohibition of engaging in premarital sexual relations with anyone, any woman, any Jewish woman who is who was once a nidah and then had not gone to the mikvah. It is prohibited to uncover their nakedness. So you'll say to me, okay, let a single woman go to the mikvah, and then she can engage in sexual relations with a single man. And the answer is, that's a big secret that the rabbis don't tell the young boys and girls. And we do not allow single women to go to the mikvah for this reason. There used to be years ago a very uncomfortable situation called a tefillin date. What is a tefillin date? It means you're going out on the date, and the man takes his tefillin with him in case he gets lucky to be able to spend the night. Can you imagine? You're taking your tefillin, which is supposed to make you holy, but then you want to be able to, in a kosher way, spend the night in order to uncover the nakedness of random women. That's frowned upon by the Torah. Therefore, this is the reason that it's prohibited to engage in sexual relations, in uncovering nakedness. And here is where the concept of shomer negia comes into discussion. What does shomer negia mean? It means touching. Now, are you allowed to touch a woman? Of course you're allowed to touch a woman. You're allowed to touch a man, you're allowed to touch a woman. That is never discussed. What is discussed is negia shel chiba. Obviously, if a man touches a woman with desire, with intention of getting pleasure from that engagement, that's the first step towards sexual relations. So that first step is prohibited, and that's when a person says, I'm shomer negia. It means I am very, very strict to not touch the opposite sex unless it's my wife or my husband or my family, because it is a slippery slope. Once it's touching and shaking hands and then hugging and then kissing, and then, where who knows where it ends up. It ends up somewhere in Europe where they relax very much the laws in certain countries of modesty. And I guess in America today as well. So this is where it all comes from. It comes from the rabbis building fences around laws of engaging in uncovering nakedness, and it goes all the way back to shomer. We teach our children that we are shomer, and we don't willy-nilly go and get close and we certainly don't isolate ourselves in a room with the opposite sex with a closed door, because it is creating, it's called yichud, it's creating a situation which could develop into something inappropriate. 21, don't offer your child to the molech, means killing your child in the spiritual kind of ecstasy. Don't do that either. 22, do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abomination, or it is an abhorrence. It is an abhorrent behavior or action. Okay, that's, and here, this is the famous prohibition of homosexuality. It appears in the next parsha as well. It is the homosexual act which is prohibited. It says the male cannot lie with the female. Cannot lie with another male the way he lies with a female, and that's clearly meant to say the action of sexual relations for male on male is prohibited in the Torah. There is no way around this verse. There's no way. Now you'll tell me, well, what do you do nowadays? X% of the world has homosexual tendencies, males on one side and females on the other side. The Torah acknowledges that people have desires and people have tendencies and people have struggles, and the Torah is there as a guidebook for us to live our lives in the most ideal way, in trying to be following God's ways, and one of them is to not engage in this type of behavior. Now, what do we do if we have our own children, our own community members, people who say, I want to be part of the observant community, I want to follow all the laws of the Torah except this one? And the answer is, we struggle. We struggle as a community, and we struggle as rabbis, and we struggle as families, and we struggle in trying to, on the one hand, not lose them. If a person wants to be Jewish and follow everything except for eating not kosher, we don't say, well, you're out, I'll never want to see you again, how dare you? No, we try to be as close to them as possible, while at the same time we say that eating not kosher is not acceptable. And violating Shabbat, the same. So the same applies to person who calls themselves homosexual. We say to them, I, as a rabbi, have said, listen, you're a member of my community. I want to be, make you closer to God. I want to make you, connect more to mitzvot and be engaged in this. You have this issue, and I'm, my position. It's fairly straightforward, but it doesn't mean that, I guess in the previous generations, you were out of the Jewish world as a result of it, and that is changing. That more and more who are finding that they have these homosexual desires and realize that they are innately, and I use that word very carefully, innately prone to a homosexual tendency. We do our best to, while acknowledging the red flag that we cannot condone this act, we at the same time try to keep them and help them as much as possible to be part of our community. The next law is bestiality. Bestiality is a good example of something that our society, except the smallest percentage, think it's a great idea. Everyone else in the entire world thinks it's an immoral thing to do. Now, when you juxtapose that with homosexuality, where at different points in history, the majority thought it was a terrible thing, and at other points in history, it's seemingly that the majority thinks that it's just fine. And this is the moral relativism of our society, as opposed to the eternal nature of the law of the Torah. The Torah says, Just as this act in verse 23 is a perversion, so too the previous act in verse 22 is a perversion. Can't get around these acts. 24, do not defile yourself in any of these ways, for it is by these ways that I'm getting rid of the people for whom you are going to conquer their land, because they defiled their land, and I said the land is going to spit you out. And therefore, if you sin in the land will spit you out as well. And we have to be very careful, especially if we're in the land of Israel, that we don't follow the laws of the ways of the immoral ones that we got rid of. And that is how the Torah ends in Parshat Achrei. We begin Parshat Kedoshim. There's 8 minutes left, and we're going to I'm going to be cut off, and then I will start it up, send the new link, and we will have the second half of the class. As soon as I clear my throat. Parshat Kedoshim transitions from talking about a holy place to talking about a holy person. Kedoshim to you, be kadosh, God says. It's a commandment. We have a commandment in the Torah to be kadosh. Why should we be kadosh? For God said, I am kadosh, your God. So what's the equation? I don't understand. Just because God is kadosh, we should be kadosh? And here is something really beautiful. It seems to me that the Bible is saying, because I am kadosh, and I'm commanding you to be kadosh, so I'm telling you, you have the capacity to be kadosh like me. I can't but assume that means that we are linked on some level to God. God has the capacity for kadosh. He commands us to be this type of kadosh, and therefore, the thing that is godly within us, that we can utilize as a catalyst to make the rest of ourselves kadosh. That thing, of course, I refer to as a soul, a neshama. And therefore, I believe that when we say we all have a soul, that is the very essence, the fire, the godly fire that is within us, that gives us drive, that gives us spirit, that gives us feeling, that gives us all the good that we have as a society, comes from that kernel, that moment, that essence, which is otherwise inexplicable. It's easy to explain the animalistic part of man. We can watch animals, Animals are naked. Animals have no shame. Animals really do whatever they need to do. They're instinctual. They eat and they procreate and they engage and they fight and they kill. So there's no such thing as a good animal or a bad animal, even though we think that cute animals are good and frightening little scary ones are bad. Well, that's us just saying, what we think of animals based on how, we feel. That's projection, okay? I have a dog. I think dogs are cute. I say dogs are good. I don't like cats. This is widely known. So I say cats are bad. You might have a cat and you might say, I love cats and cats are good. And the answer, the Torah says, is cats and dogs and tarantulas and dolphins and orangutans are neither good nor bad, because good and bad are a moral association. And animals do not have that moral component. Why not? Why don't you say animals should have a moral component? And the answer is because they don't have that Tselem Elokim. They don't have that kernel of godliness. If you don't have that kernel of godliness that can instruct you, that can guide you, that can inspire you to be better than the animals around you, then you're not expected to rise above it. Therefore, the animals remain the animals. The people, however, we have this human condition where there's something that's intangible, but nevertheless impossible to deny. This sense of something that's metaphysical, that's inside of us, that drives us to this concept called kedusha. So be kadosh, for I, the Lord says, am kadosh too. And you want to know the first way to be kadosh? Honor your parents. What a beautiful idea! That once again, the animal, I guess, you get someone who talk about that their animals do have some kind of connections to their kin, to their own, but on the whole, it's an independent being, creature. Whereas a child recognizes that they have a responsibility to their mother and their father, to fear them, to love them, and to respect them, and to take care of them, and they are the source of everything that their children have become. And there's a famous statement in the Talmud that it's God together with the man and the woman that creates a child. So the three of them create this new life. And that that is something that we must use as I guess, the basis of our journey towards becoming holy. It all starts in the house. Al tifnu elim, do not turn to idols and make gods for yourselves. That is not a way to find kedusha. Kedusha has to be something organic. Kedusha has to be something that is from your home, from your essence, from your soul. And therefore, there's going to be now a list of laws that are related to all ways to become holy. The next three verses we have 20 seconds left. The next three verses relate to animal sacrifices, and they should be done in the proper way. Let's not ignore and forget about the way that Kedusha is conveyed. Holiness is understood and practiced in ancient time, and therefore the way in which you engage in your animal sacrifice also can make you holy, or the opposite. And then it juxtaposes that with how you act in your field. Very important that we recognize that holiness can